You know, that phone in your pocket, it's way more than just a device for calls and texts. It's actually a silent witness, and it's constantly recording a hidden history of your movements and your interactions. In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on the incredibly powerful world of mobile network forensics, and it's a field that affects you every single day, whether you even realize it or not.
And believe me, this is not just some abstract theory. The stakes here are incredibly high. We're talking about major terrorist attacks, like the one in Madrid, all the way to organized crime. The technology we rely on every day can play a central role. But that very same technology can be the key to cracking the case wide open.
So here's the thing you've got to understand. Your phone is always talking. I don't just mean when you're making a call or shooting off a text. I mean constantly. It's always whispering to the network around it. And every single one of those digital whispers leaves a tiny, invisible breadcrumb, a trail of evidence that investigators can follow.
So, how do investigators actually use this secret trail? Well, what's really fascinating here is that this evidence, it's not just about proving someone is guilty. It has the power to do something that's just as important. It can prove someone is innocent.
A perfect example? Just look at the Meredith Kircher murder investigation. In that huge, high-profile case, it was the forensic analysis of text messages that ultimately cleared a man who had been wrongfully accused. And that data was pulled directly from the network, not just the phone. It's a powerful reminder of the dual-edged nature of this kind of evidence.
So how is any of this even possible? It's not magic, that's for sure. It's all about infrastructure. To really get a grip on the evidence, we first have to understand the network itself. This silent, incredibly complex web of technology that makes your phone work, and in doing so, records its every move.
Okay, so let's start with the most basic question, right? How in the world does your phone, even when it's just sitting there in your pocket doing nothing, how does it manage to generate so much data for the network to log?
All right, let's break this diagram down. It all starts with your phone, of course. It connects using radio waves to a cell tower. That's the BTS, or base transceiver station. Those towers are then managed by a base station controller. But all of that information eventually feeds into the core of the network, and to the real star of the show for investigators, the MSC.
The Mobile Switching Center, or MSC, this thing is the absolute heart of the network. You can think of it as the central brain. It's what routes all your calls and messages. But more importantly, it's the piece of the puzzle that generates and stores those super detailed logs of every single activity. And that's the data that becomes evidence. And this whole process, it's completely automatic. It never stops. The instant you power on your phone, it sends out a signal to the nearest tower that basically says, "Hey, I'm here." It authenticates itself with the network, and right from that exact moment, its digital trace has begun.
Okay, so we've got all this data flying around, but how does that turn into actual, usable evidence in an investigation? Well, we can really break it all down into three fundamental categories. These are the core digital breadcrumbs that tell an investigator the story. It really boils down to these three things. First up is your location. The network knows, with different levels of accuracy, where your device is. Second, you've got logs, records of who you called or texted, exactly when you did it, and for how long. And third, the content itself, the actual words in your messages. So let's talk location. How do they actually pinpoint where a phone is? Well, the simplest way is cell ID, which just tells you which tower your phone is connected to. Now, that only gives you a general area, which can sometimes be kilometers wide, and that limitation is a huge point of argument in court cases. For more precision, they use really clever methods like TDOA, which measures the time it takes your signal to hit multiple towers to triangulate a better position. And then there's assisted GPS, where the network actually gives your phone's GPS a boost to get a faster, more accurate lock.
And this is what it looks like when you put all that data together. It's pretty amazing, right? This is a visualization straight from investigative software, and it's tracking the paths of two different devices over time. You can literally watch their movements and see where they might have crossed paths across an entire city.
And behind that cool-looking map is this, the raw data. This is a simplified version of something called a call detail record, or a CDR. Now, network providers generate these for billing, but for an investigator, these things are an absolute goldmine. You can see who called who, the exact time and how long they talked, and crucially, the cell ID where the call started and where it ended.
And it's not just about calls, you know. Sometimes text messages are even more damning. In the case against the former mayor of Detroit, investigators dug up tens of thousands of archived text messages, not from the phone, but from the service provider. It was a huge wake-up call that even if you delete a message from your device, the network often has its own copy.
Okay, so far, we've been talking about digging through the past, right? Historical data. But what about right now? What about listening in as things are actually happening? Well, with the right legal authorization, investigators can go from forensics to live, real-time interception.
This is so cool. This slide basically shows you the two halves of the whole system. Over on the left, you've got the hardware, these big racks of servers in a monitoring center. The network provider essentially just copies a target's communication line and pipes it directly here. And then on the right, you see the software. This is the interface an investigator actually uses to listen in, read messages, and analyze all that data as it's happening.
But of course, this isn't a one-way street. As the tools for investigation get more and more sophisticated, so do the ways criminals try to avoid them. It's created this constant technological arms race, a really high-tech game of cat and mouse.
I mean, just look at this breakdown. It's a constant back and forth. For every tool investigators have, there's a countermeasure. They use location tracking. Criminals use signal jammers to create dead zones. They intercept calls. The more sophisticated criminals are using encrypted cryptophones. Investigators analyze data trails. Criminals use anonymous disposable prepaid phones to break that chain of evidence.
So what exactly is a cryptophone? Because it's way more than just a password on your screen. What it does is it takes your voice, chops it up into tiny digital packets, scrambles them all up using a unique session key, and then sends them. The phone on the other end uses that exact same key to put it all back together. If you don't have that key, all an investigator hears is garbled, unintelligible digital noise. That level of encryption is the single biggest challenge for modern law enforcement. It's a digital lock that, for all practical purposes, just can't be picked.
And believe it or not, it gets even more complex. As this diagram shows, organized groups can create their own private, closed-off networks. Think of each of those clusters of phones as its own little secret club, using its own unique key. This means they can all communicate securely inside their group and even between groups. But to an investigator trying to listen from the outside, it's a complete black box. It's impenetrable unless you can somehow get those keys.
And all of this, it brings us to the big, thorny question at the heart of it all. The very same technology that criminals use to hide their activities is the same technology that everyday people might use to protect their privacy. So as this tech gets more powerful and spreads everywhere, we're all forced to ask the same thing. Where is the right balance? Where do we draw that line between our need for security and our fundamental right to privacy?